Hi, everybody. It's 1 o'clock. We'll get started in just a few minutes here. Thank you for joining us. We're very appreciative to have you here. Hello, everyone. I see the participant tally is steadily increasing. We'll give just one more minute and then we'll get started. Thank you for attending. We're appreciative that you took some time to join us today. We'll get started momentarily. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar series, Collaborative Mentor Webinar Series. This is May 26th, 2022. My name is David Martis. I'm the Director of Mentor Michigan and the Director of Youth Initiatives for the Michigan Community Service Commission. And yeah, I will be the facilitator for today. And today we're going to spend some time talking about Introduction to Healing-Centered Restorative Engagement. And we're incredibly fortunate to have Dr. Tracy Hall and Dr. Jessica Camp join us today. And they've been incredibly busy, and some of you are probably used to attending these on, I think, the third Thursday. This is a little bit later, but Dr. Tracy and Dr. Jess were kind enough to move their schedule around to get this done. So we're very appreciative for that. And I just wanted to mention as well that we're very fortunate to have them on here. And I've had the blessing of knowing them and in a work relationship, but also just considered friends too. And each time that I've spoken with them, I've learned, I've laughed, and I've come away from that experience just feeling better as well. And so I'm just very appreciative that they can spend this time with us, just sharing the knowledge that they have. And especially it's been a really rough week, but just as I mentioned, just speaking with Tracy, speaking with Jess, I've come away from that always laughing, learning, and then just as I said, just feeling better. And if we're talking about mentoring youth, I think that time spent as a mentor with youth, if youth can come away from that experience, that time that they're spending with their mentor, if they're learning, laughing, and feeling better, I think that's important. So next slide, please. Thank you for participating in today's webinar. Of course, all attendees are muted for the best sound. Any questions that you might have, if you'd kindly put those in the Q&A panel, we'd be appreciative. And comments go in the chat box. Live caption is available in the panel by clicking on the closed caption at the bottom of the screen. If you would, I don't know if we have polls, but yeah, just if we do, if you reply to those, that would be great. Who is with us today? If you could just type in the chat real quickly, just to introduce yourself, and then just for all participants to see your message, change to all panelists and attendees in the chat so we can see that. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for entering that information. We're appreciative. Great. Something to know as well, 1 week after the webinar, all attendees will receive an email with instructions for how to access a PDF of the presentation slides and webinar recording. Additionally, a link to the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series webpage, where all slides, recordings, and resources are posted. Please help us out by answering survey questions at the end of the webinar. All right, today's webinar, I'll go through an introduction to our presenters, Dr. Tracy and Dr. Jess. They will get into what is healing-centered restorative engagement. How does healing-centered restorative engagement differ from trauma-informed care? What are the priorities of Hcre interventions? And how do we implement Hcre practices? There's me. As I mentioned at the very beginning, my name is David Martis. I'm the Director of Youth Initiatives for the Michigan Community Service Commission and the Director for Mentor Michigan. And I'm fortunate enough to facilitate this, part of the committee that puts this together. So thank you for joining us once again. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Tracy Hall. Professional experience, 20 years in Washington, D.C., based legislative, executive branch and government relations public service, 10 years in Greater Detroit Human Services and Workforce Development, 10 years as U of M, University of Michigan, Dearborn faculty member and academic administrator, more than 5 years developing healing-centered restorative engagement via work with Detroit's Opportunity Youth. From a personal standpoint, Tracy is part of a multiracial family, has decades of coaching and mentoring experience, passion for creating theoretical and practical alternative administrative practices, pathways out of poverty, and connecting people to opportunity. Thank you for being here with us, Tracy. And along with Tracy, we have Dr. Jess Camp, a PhD. She's a licensed social worker. And then I had to look this. So certified advanced alcohol and drug counselor and advanced certified trauma practitioner and educator. We're so happy that Jess is able to join us. From a professional standpoint, 20 plus years in social work in Wayne County. That's Detroit is the center of that for those across the United States. Started as an adult mental health and substance use recovery therapist in community mental health, committed to improving inclusion and equity in employment and higher education, poverty researcher examining intersecting inequities by race, gender, and disability. From a personal standpoint, Jess, survivor of complex childhood trauma, mental health recovery, and family healing of mental health disorders. So I just, as I said at the beginning, I'm so incredibly happy that Jess and Tracy were able to find time in their schedule to be with us. As I mentioned, laugh, learn, come away feeling better. And we're so happy to have them here. So I know we're in this setting in the round of applause. I'd say, hey, give them a round of applause. But if you wouldn't mind, just put your hands together, if you would so kindly, for Jess and Tracy. And thank you.
Thanks so much, Dave. I'm going to go ahead and kick this off because we have so much content that I think you're going to be excited to learn about. We are the type of folks who don't mind being interrupted. If you've got an urgent question, by all means, feel free to throw it in the chat. We've got Desiree and others who will be watching the chat for us. So we're going to just keep right on moving. If you can go to the next slide, that'd be terrific. We want to share with you a little bit about our own story, about how we came to developing this approach called healing-centered restorative engagement. Over the past 20 years or so, I've been deeply involved in the Detroit nonprofit community, as Dave was mentioning. particularly working to develop pathways to opportunity and prosperity for marginalized communities. Along the way, I helped to launch an AmeriCorps program in Detroit that specifically recruited so-called disconnected young adults, those 18 to 25-year-olds who weren't connected to either work or school and are often referred to as opportunity youth. We were recruiting them into our AmeriCorps program to serve in their own communities. And as such, we were kind of viewing AmeriCorps as a means for providing a workforce development on-ramp for these young people, right? Through that work, I became deeply aware of the toxic stress and trauma that these youth were experiencing. And so I reached out to Jess Camp, who was becoming a close friend pretty quickly, and she's now my research and practice partner, to help me learn something more about sort of the social work perspective on how we could assist youth in not only coping with their trauma and their toxic stress, but more importantly, how to help them begin their healing journeys. We quickly realized that approaches such as trauma-informed care, while popular and becoming well-known by the minute, weren't adequate, right? And more importantly, they didn't move beyond the clinical to the systems level changes that we knew instinctively were necessary. We also realized that there were several other approaches that we wished to draw on. And so we began our own journey of figuring out exactly what we thought could address the gaps and challenges we were seeing. So I'm going to turn it over now to Jess to share a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Tracy. So as Tracy says, we actually spent years getting trained in various trauma-informed care modalities and healing-centered engagement, and really just tried to expose ourselves to everything that was out there to see what we could be doing to help and to do better. And what we found when we were being exposed to trauma-informed care is that they talked about this as if they were moving the question. And what they said is that our traditional approach to doing this work was that we would ask, what is wrong with a person or what is wrong with a community? And that's kind of where we would stop. But that by being trauma-informed, we didn't ask that question anymore. We actually asked, what happened to this person? What happened to this community? In other approaches like healing-centered engagement, they move this question even further and they say things like, we actually need to ask what's right with this person, what's right with this community. And we're like, yes, those are all really good questions. And so we feel like we moved it one step further. And what we're asking here is, how is what's right? How is what's strong, the strengths, the resiliencies, the grit, the strengths that we know happen, even the post-traumatic growth, how can all of that be used to help us heal from what has happened? And so we call this model healing-centered restorative engagement. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So how is healing-centered restorative engagement different? We know there's a ton of trauma-informed care models out there. And so this is how we see our model as being a little bit different, maybe in some of the models that you might be familiar with or heard of before. So the original trauma-informed care models tended to be based in the clinical. A lot of the research that was done around that was done on mental health and substance use agencies and what they really needed. Unfortunately, those are treatment-based agencies, right? So they tend to be reactive in the sense that trauma has been diagnosed and we're providing a variety of services, usually specialists and experts who've been trained to a certain level in order to be able to deal with this. What we think is that this needs to be proactive, right? If we're only having this in the hands of clinicians, we know we don't have enough clinicians in order to help all the youth that are out there. And we know that if we're only making it based in it being a specialist sort of thing, that we need to like deinstitutionalize that a little bit, right? We need it to be in all of our hands from the second that a youth is walking in the front door, right, to every single person that they might have contact with. We need to bake it in a little bit more. It needs to not just be the social worker or the expert that's sort of the one person or the specialized part of the program. It needs to be a part of inherently how we're doing things. We need to bake it in. And so we wanted to be more proactive, more preventative. Also, because when we're doing treatment, right, it tends to be time limited. You receive mental health services for a time limited amount of time, 5 sessions, and then, you know, hopefully things are better or the symptoms have been relieved and that ends. But if we're baking it into just how we do things, then it's just a part of service provision. So it exists as long as the youth is in contact with us. It doesn't start, it doesn't stop, it's just ongoing. When we're thinking diagnostically, we tend to be problem focused, right? You can't get access to the service unless we do an intake form, we kind of get a diagnosis. But here's the thing, we know youth are exposed to incredibly high levels of trauma. I think the things that we continue to see week after week in this country not only show that our youth are exposed to this, but we also know what we've been dealing with following the pandemic. Thinking more about how we can be strengths focused, how we can deinstitutionalize this, take this from the hands of the experts, build it from the ground up is going to be incredibly important for us to get ahead of the trauma and the toxic stress we know that our youth are dealing with. Next slide, please. We also know that there's a deep interconnection, right, between exposure to trauma and toxic stress and disconnection from well-being and opportunity. If you think of the kids that might have difficulty getting access to recovery services, right, we know who those kids are. They're the kids that are disconnected in other ways too. Another reason that we can't allow the inequality of it only being in the hands of experts or only being kind of clinical, that we're beginning to talk about these issues and work with this. And I know that I'm talking to the choir about this. We know that there's this vicious cycle that happens. And we want to make sure that these services are more broadly available for every single youth in every single way that they may contact any system, right, throughout the course of their life. Next slide. Thank you. Another thing, when we were kind of thinking about how we wanted to do this work, is that Western approaches to treatment and healing and recovery tend to prioritize independence, right? So they get us to the point that our mental health symptoms or what we're dealing with, they're at a point that we can be independent. We've mastered skills. We now can use those skills to get a job, be productive, and do important things in society. That said, that is a very Western approach to development, that independence is sort of the peak of where we go. And indigenous models, particularly this model called the Circle of Courage, which comes from the Lakota tribe, says that it's not about us being independent, that we actually need to get to the point that we're interdependent, that it is about us being well enough that we are able to contribute to the community around us, that we're able to contribute to those next. Talking to you as mentors, I know you inherently understand and really feel this model because you understand the role that you play, right? In helping the youth that you're connected to. You pass that message along. You understand the importance of interdependence being what we do, not just independence. Next slide. Oh, Tracy, you're muted. No worries.
I knew I was going to do that. So thanks, Jess. One of the most important approaches we've drawn heavily on is called restorative practices. Many of you on this webinar may have heard of restorative justice, which is more popularly known and which is becoming increasingly well known and utilized in our court systems. But for purposes of today, what we're most interested in is sharing a few key elements that underpin the broader approach, which is called restorative practices. As you can see on this slide, the International Institute for Restorative Practices describes the 4 ways in which people, such as mentors, engage with their mentees. In the bottom left-hand quadrant, you can see that low limit setting combined with less than adequate support structures results in neglect, right? In the upper left-hand quadrant, where there is high control and low support, we see punitive approaches playing out. For instance, you might say to a kid, well, you didn't do your math exercises, so you don't get to go play out at recess or hang out with the other kids in playtime, right? Because you didn't do something, so we're going to punish you for that, right? In the lower right quadrant, there's high support, but not enough limit setting, resulting in too much permissiveness. And we know often if we don't give boundaries and we don't set limits for youth, that's almost as bad as being too punitive, right? It's either one is too much in one direction and the other. But in that far upper right quadrant, we see both limit setting and discipline combined with high encouragement and nurturing, which we like to refer to, and the IIRP folks refer to as restorative. In other words, we don't do to or for a mentee or a mentor, but instead we work with them. Jess and I like to say that you've got to connect with someone before you can get to go to work with them. So we prioritize relationship building and connection before moving to the content. For instance, tutoring a mentee, right? So I'm sure that some of your heads are nodding. This probably is not unfamiliar. We wanted to lay some groundwork of what are the strengths of the models that we draw on to build healing-centered restorative engagement. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Jess.
So we know as we're kind of building these relationships and creating these connections, though, that especially youth that have been exposed to trauma and toxic stress are going to have extra challenges that are going to interfere with this relationship. So I want to talk a little bit about this, not that we deeply kind of have to get into like what the diagnosis looks like, but as a therapist, I look for 4 things of a youth that could potentially be responding to trauma, right? Their brain is in survival mode and they are kind of, right, they're going to be hypervigilant. They're going to have some of these things. So what do they have? They can be re-experiencing some of those symptoms of harm, re-experiencing an event or a series of events. They might be avoiding situations where harm has happened. They might have negative moods, thoughts, and cognitions, and they might really kind of have a sense of arousal, a lot of moving, some hyperactivity. So let's break this down a little bit more. What might each of these kind of look like so that you have a better idea of how they might appear as you're beginning to mentor somebody? So when we see somebody re-experiencing this, we can see that someone could even have something as serious as having a flashback of the trauma that they've experienced. And if you've never had this happen yourself, or you've never worked with somebody who's had this happen, I'm sure you've seen a dramatization on television of what this flashback might appear. This is when somebody is experiencing an event almost as if it is occurring right now. And so they're in that moment of panic, they're in that moment of fear, they are re-experiencing the trauma. And that's kind of what we expect, right? That's kind of the most dramatic expression of re-experiencing. But this can also be a youth who appears to be inattentive and you're attempting to engage them and maybe they just seem very thoughtful, or they have really traumatic dreams and they mention that they have these terrible dreams, or even just a sense of foreboding over their life, like things don't tend to go that well. And they just tend to kind of feel like they have a negative cloud or a negative energy over their life. I've even had youth say like, well, I think I'm cursed or something. That might be an expression of ways that they're re-experiencing trauma. Avoidance can look a little bit different. This can be full level dissociating, or somebody dissociates from their body. They have no affect. They're not actually present in the moment. And they'll mention later, it felt like they had an out of body experience. But of course, avoidance doesn't always look that severe. Sometimes it can be coming to your program drunk, or having used drugs and be using drugs a lot. It might be any type of numbing behavior. It can be diminished engagement with their day-to-day activities with you, even though it's an activity that that you really get excited about. Maybe you're having difficulty engaging with this one youth. Negative cognitions and moods. These are youth that might take an over sense of responsibility, especially if things go wrong. Like, I know it's my fault that this happened. They might have a distorted sense of self, a lot of negative cognitions, like maybe using words of saying like, I don't feel like I'm a very valuable person, or I don't really have anything to contribute, or why would I try? When you're saying, hey, like, let's study because then you're going to get a good grade. Why would I need to get a good grade, Dr. Camp? I'm not even going to be alive when I'm an adult. So when you start to hear that language, and that's one I hear a lot, I'm not even going to be alive then, is sometimes that I hear repeatedly, and that is hard to hear. But these are youth that believe that, like, right, they're having a lot of difficulty in seeing that future. They have that negative mood and cognition around how they're engaging with things. And lastly is the arousal piece. Now, this can be the piece that really gets youth in trouble because they might be perfectly kind, almost maybe a little disassociated, and then suddenly, right, they're throwing a chair, or they're yelling at their teacher, or they're getting it right, or they're fighting with peers. And although that's the most drastic when we see hyperarousal, and it can kind of happen in that minute as somebody's responding to that trauma, it can also be verbal altercations in the sense of worrying about the future. Like, I know that teacher doesn't like me, and I'm not even, when I go to that class, if they even give me a bad look, I'm going to slap them, right? And so you hear language around like, I'm already aroused, I'm already nervous about what's going to happen. I've had this bad interaction, but I'm trying to predict so that I can protect myself from having these bad experiences. So it doesn't always have to be that large physical verbal, the altercation or physical altercation with peers. Sometimes it can be those more verbal signs of anxiety and being aroused. So I know that I've kind of gone through several examples, and I know you've probably seen some examples yourself in the youth that you've worked with. And I'm just hoping we can all learn from each other today. If you've seen any of this or some of these reactions that have happened from trauma, without, of course, identifying the youth or even the program maybe that you've seen this happen in, what have been some of the experiences that you've seen that youth have reacted to that you think might come from a space of having experienced trauma or toxic stress? And if you could share those in the chat, then we would like to kind of read those out and share those with the whole group.
And while they're putting some notes in the chat, we're hoping to tell us how they've seen some of these evidences of trauma. I want to ask Jess, am I correct in remembering you sharing in the past that these sorts of behaviors are often misdiagnosed as ADHD or ADD, when in fact, that's not what these are. This is trauma and toxic stress. So if you see these behaviors, you're seeing evidence that youth have been exposed to trauma and toxic stress. Am I right about that?
Yes, so the most common misdiagnosis for having complex trauma is actually ADHD and ODD, or oppositional defiant disorder. And often if I see a youth that has ODD and ADHD, that's not it. Those are very, very different diagnoses. And so when I see a kid come in and that's what they've said they've had, or even bipolar sometimes, the first questions I'm beginning to ask are questions about whether or not this is a youth that's had a trauma past, because those tend to come up a lot. And I see that we have a lot of people beginning to share.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I interrupt?
Oh, no, I was going to just share out that we had about 4 or 5 if you all wanted to read out a few of those.
Yeah, so David says sudden disinterest. Yeah, right. So when that trauma is triggered, suddenly there can be disinterest, because that might be that youth having been in more thrive, right? So the relationship is going well. And then if that trauma was triggered at all, now suddenly kind of being more in protective mode, more in survive mode. Responding in a loud voice. Yeah, so if you have a youth that's just starting right to get loud. Disassociating from groups. Yep, absolutely. Difficulty with sleep, self-care, difficulty focusing and attending. Yes. Difficulty attending is a big one, because sometimes being in a group or feeling like, I've had you say like, well, I'm afraid to show up because what if I dissociate and I'm there? How am I going to feel safe when I'm around other people? Absolutely. Completely disconnecting from the environment. Yes.
Oh my gosh, these descriptions are so perfect. I hope you're all
Yeah.
reading through these, because you guys are spot on. You are seeing trauma, absolutely evidence of adverse childhood experiences or ongoing experiences, right? The kids you're dealing with are really struggling with hard stuff.
Real quick,
Yeah.
Tracy and Jess, question in the chat, and the question and answer was, how do you differentiate between trauma response from ADHD, since PTSD often mimics ADHD? I thought it might be a good question for now.
That's perfect. Go ahead, Jess.
So that's a really good question. And honestly, it can be hard to tell until you really get to know a youth. But what I found the difference is that with ADHD, the inattention or the hyperactivity tends to be the main part of the issue. There's not kind of some of these other symptoms going on. Individuals with ADHD, for example, aren't going to be avoiding. As a matter of fact, they love to be engaged, like to be talking to people, what's going on here, what's going on here. They're not going to have some of this. ADHD tends to not come with the negative cognitions and moods. It can, like sometimes like, oh, I just really have trouble focusing and studying. But one of the things I noticed with trauma is it tends to be, I am a bad person. I've experienced these things because I am bad and I don't have value. I don't see that as much with ADHD. ADHD, it might be like, why can't I study? Why can't I just focus on this? It seems to be so easy for all of my classmates. Why am I the one struggling with this? So it tends to be a little bit more situational in how it's discussed. Not that it can't have other aspects. And the arousal tends to be like more like hyperactivity, but not in the sense of it being connected more kind of to some of these life experiences. So I'd ask a little bit more about this. Now, as we know, you can have trauma and not remember it, especially for incredibly severe traumas or traumas that were younger. So, you know, this really is about getting to know the youth, getting to know their history, seeing if we're beginning to pull from many of these boxes, because at this point, if we're starting to see across the spectrum, maybe they have trauma and they have ADHD, and that's something we need to consider. But if they have trauma, one of the things we do for ADHD, right, is we prescribe uppers, we prescribe Adderall or something, right, that tends to be activating. If I prescribe a kid Adderall, right, and all of a sudden they're worse, maybe it wasn't ADHD, because that should have helped the ADHD. If I give them something that helps it, right, and all of a sudden they're worse, I might be dealing with trauma. And so that's something that I'd always want to be thinking as a professional. As a non-clinician, we just want to be assuming, we know that trauma is incredibly common. We actually want to treat all the youth that come to us as if they may have had this experience, that we want that to be our default, not necessarily that we have a specialty thing or a special program or a special, but that it's baked in so that no matter what if youth are experiencing, when they come to us, they're getting a sense of that healing, inclusion, and belonging just as a part of what they're dealing with.
Let's move to the next slide, because I think we've got more content and we'll have more time for a little more interaction. Okay, so I wanted to share the content on this slide because there is fundamentally another way to view and do your mentoring work that's grounded, like all of healing-centered restorative engagement, on alternative theories, which result in other kinds of practices which we believe and view as more inclusive, socially equitable, collaborative, and so forth, right? As a public administration philosopher, so I'm the public administrator philosopher, Jess is the social work philosopher. This stuff gets me really wound up, right? The traditional left-hand column describes how most of our organizations, whether they're public or private, this is how they operate, right? You're familiar with this. You know it, you recognize it, right? It's a very familiar perspective. But I'm going to suggest that there is another way. In the right-hand column, you can see a different set of grounding perspectives or assumptions that can inform our work. For instance, you'll note that we emphasize collaboration and relationship, and we value everyone as having knowledge and expertise, no matter what their background or their experience is. It's often, I'll give you an example, it's often the mentor from the neighborhood who may not have a formal education. It might be the grandma, right? Who's on the corner of the block, who knows exactly how to recruit kids into this program that you're running. And you hired a professional, somebody who's got experience recruiting in some other context, and you bring them in, but they're not from the neighborhood and they don't know the local kids. You go to that grandma, she knows exactly how to get this person to invite that person. And before you know it, you've got 10 kids coming into your program. And it's that local knowledge and expertise that we don't typically prize on the left-hand side of the column. It's always the expert with the degrees that we prize, right? But in this alternative perspective, anyone can be an expert. Anybody can have knowledge that we can share, right? And can help us, assist us, right? Another example is to use less judgment and correction. I'm sure that all of you in the mentoring world think this way, but there's lots of folks out there who come into mentoring work thinking that they need to correct someone's mistakes and correct their errors, right? And so we're fixing them rather than thinking about your perspective as being one of a coach, a facilitator, someone who's encouraging someone to learn and to grow, and you're just supporting and pushing them, nudging them along, rather than being punitive, as we were talking about earlier on that other slide, right? So as Jess keeps saying, we want to be clear about the fact that we bake this alternative set of perspectives and assumptions into everything that we do. And what that means is we strive to expose our organizational leaders, the managers, the janitors, the front desk personnel, the volunteers, into all of this set of approaches, right? So when we go in and we train in an organization, we insist It's got to be from the president, CEO, down to the volunteer and everybody in between, and especially those janitors and folks that typically don't get professional development experiences, right? Because they're the ones who can nurture all the time just by their presence, just by having a smile on their face, instead of looking at a kid to see how they're out of line. If they're saying, hey, hope you're having a great day today, that's very different than, I don't want to see you out of the room that you're supposed to be in today, right? There's different ways that we can use language and relationship building to strengthen how we do our work. And most importantly, these systems approaches on the alternative perspective are fundamentally healing, nurturing, encouraging, caring, and indeed loving. And loving is really where we're headed, right? So if we leave this work at the clinical one-on-one level, that area of, okay, take the kid out of the classroom and send them to a social worker or a therapist, right? We stay stuck in a system that doesn't ultimately change things for everyone. We know there aren't enough mental health services, as just mentioned, out there to serve everyone that needs it, especially for our marginalized youth, right? So encouraging these sorts of practices at all levels of our actual organizations is a critical way in which we can support our mentors and our mentees and ensure that we're creating holistic healing organizations. On the next slide, Jess is going to describe strategies for using these alternative theoretical frames to guide our engagement with youth. Jess?
And yes, and thank you again, everyone, for sharing what you shared. You can understand how difficult it is to work with youth who are both disconnected or tearing down the posters in your class or crying. This can be difficult to deal with day in and day out, especially if you might not feel like you're in a space where you know how to have these conversations or know how to deal with some of these issues. So what are some of the things that we can do? Well, we start with self-care. And I know probably some of you are like, yeah, we start with self-care. I see you though, because I know myself. We are so bad at this. We are so bad at this. We don't do a good job self-caring. We don't do a good job setting boundaries. We don't do a good job thinking about this for ourselves. But until we understand what our own reactions to trauma and harm are, what we know, right? Are we fight, flight, freeze, fawn? What do we engage in when we experience that? Because understanding what we need to heal is such a great way that we can mentor it to others. And I'm going to tell you this right now, if we're not doing it for ourselves, we aren't setting the culture or the environment to have other people do it. It doesn't matter how much we tell other people, don't check your email on the weekend, or don't be doing, no, we're doing it. And so we're not setting the tone. We're not actually setting the environment for self-care. And so this can be, I think, the hardest thing to do, honestly, but it's part of what we really need to do in order to create systems that are healing, right? Because those systems are made up of us. So really taking that time, thinking about ways, right? Especially since the pandemic too, a lot of the things that we were doing for self-care, maybe we've stopped doing because we can't engage in them anymore. Have we replaced all of those things? So be thinking about self-care, first of all. Next, starting with strengths. So whether we're working with other mentors, working with ourselves, or working with youth, what are the strengths? What are the strengths that we have that make us strong as a mentor? What are the strengths that our youth have that make them good? You might have a youth and wow, they are so great at just getting everybody off track. But that's often a youth that might be really good at getting everybody on track. If you're like, listen, I'm going to use those leadership skills that I can see that you have, and we're going to redirect that a little bit. How can we leverage some of their adjacent strengths, that maybe experiences they haven't had before, and lift those up too? So be finding those strengths. Be showing them how they can use those strengths, right? And different, because that already exists. And so that can be a really wonderful place to start. Of course, and I know Tracy and I have talked about this over and over and over again, and I know that you probably hear this in every single professional development you get: relationship, right? Old business, it was like location. In human services, relationship. But how do we set for community building when sometimes we're in spaces or we're working with communities that we may not have a lived experience or that are disconnected from maybe what we know? How do we set for shared community? What are some of the the shared definitions, the language, the values. What does it mean for me to be a mentor? How do I see that? How does my mentee see being a mentee? What does it mean that they're getting mentee services? What are their responsibilities in that? What are your responsibilities as a mentor? And how do we have these conversations and set for shared community that allows us to know, right? Like how we're connecting, what the norms are for how we do this and how we engage with each other. And I think sometimes we don't take the time to do that because we kind of assume that everybody knows what it is that we do. But I found that it's incredibly helpful to literally have that conversation. What do you need from me? What do I need from you? Really engaging with our connected connectors too. We often think about this as always being the work that we're doing with our mentees, but how are you connecting to other peers that either have strengths that are similar to yours, but maybe they're in a different arena, or connecting to other mentors who might have strengths that you don't have, but like your youth might need, right? So maybe one day you take their mentee and one day they take yours because you know that you've got complementary but different strengths. And then, of course, we always want to be lowering the barriers to participation. A lot of our programs historically, right, we punish through exclusion. You've done a bad thing, so you can't be here today. But one of the things that that does for a youth that experiences trauma is that can actually be really harmful. And when they're already avoiding and it's already really challenging for them to get there, what that can tell them is, I knew it. I knew I wasn't good enough and I knew I didn't belong. Instead, can we punish through inclusion? You distracted the whole class. Come up here. You're going to help me keep everyone on track today. You're going to check everyone's homework in, right? How can we switch that, right? When your kids are coming, maybe they're high and it's a sobriety program. Like you can't be here if you've been drinking. You can't be here if you got stoned today. But what are ways that we can continue to include, not reward the behavior, but distance the behavior? Let it be that the behavior is the bad thing, not that the kid is the bad thing, right? Because too often these things get woven together and this creates extra harm for kids. If we could almost just do that in the majority of our youth serving systems, we'd make huge progress towards healing. Lastly, we have to take time for reflection. And this is something that we don't often do because we are so busy. We are often in crisis mode. And so we don't take the time to slow down to say, what went well? What could have gone better? This can be everything from mindfulness and meditation to gratefulness, but really taking time together as mentors and mentees to say, hey, what do you think went really well about today's activity? What do you think could have gone better? What do we continue doing? What should we stop? And actually having minutes where we take that time for reflection and we model it. And if there's anything, if there's two things that I could leave you with when it comes to reflection, there's two things we know and research shows us over and over again that is almost the most healing thing you can do. And that's dreaming about the future. Don't worry about resources. Don't worry. What do we dream for the future? When you measure somebody's stress level before, ask them to think about the future and you measure it afterwards, there are significant reductions in stress because just thinking about a better future, we know that dreaming it doesn't make it be, but it will never be if we can't dream it, right? And so taking a minute to think about the future and extreme creativity. We know that a lot of the ways that we do things are from a scarcity standpoint because we just have so much to do and sometimes so little time. What if we stop for a minute and we think about what it could be like if there were no barriers, no boxes, no holds barred? What does this look like if we're being as creative as possible? So taking the time for those two things.
Yes, there's a great question in the chat that says that she would love more, or they would love more examples of distancing behavior and punishing through inclusion.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. Should we do that right now? Teresa, do you have I know you've got a ton of examples too.
Oh, come on. You're the one who came up with that phrase. You're better at this.
I don't know about that.
Often
So
it's putting the kid in leadership roles. I know that.
often putting the kid in leadership roles, because I know if I've got a kid, but even too, if like there's numbing behaviors, I think, I know I'm lucky and I do have that social work degree. So sometimes I can, right. But, I don't even think that that's necessary, because I know a lot of people who are connected to youth who don't have that, and really just being like, hey, I know you came high today, but like, why was that a choice you thought you like needed to make? Like, so instead of like being like, that's it, go home, you're high. Maybe it'd be like, come in the office. Okay, you're going to sit down. First of all, I need you to drink a little bit of water, have a sandwich. Like, I need you to sober up a little bit. But when you're sobering up, I have a few things that I need you to help me with. And maybe that's a good time, right? Have them do a worksheet, have them do a paper, have them, even think about their own sobriety a little bit more. Like how, like, hey, like, I noticed that you're getting stoned. Is that contributing to your future? Well, I just need to take the edge off a little bit sometimes. Is this the only thing that takes the edge off? Why don't we write a list of like other things that help you take the edge off? Like maybe they're still going to get high, but maybe you can find some things like that, right, that include them. Like, hey, the next time you want to get high, like come over here and talk to me first. Okay, like we're going to do this. And it's not going to happen overnight. There's not going to be, there's no magic thing. It really is the relationship and being able to include. And then, I mean, right, Tracy, we see it all the time. Once the inclusion is there, but it does require us to be there, and it does require us to not be burned out or like, right, because it is easier sometimes if we're not feeling in that space to just be like, I'm so tired. I've had 3 kids show up and they're just don't like, how am I, like, I need to get to class to do this thing. Like, how am I going to be helping each of these youth? And sometimes like taking that time and slowing down and giving ourselves that moment too, I think that can be difficult to take the minute to be like, okay, like we need to do this. So there can be, I mean, the possibilities are endless. Like, how do you think about getting that right to help you more? I mean, obviously if they like just not a threat to safety, that would be different. But like, if they're just being inattentive or something like that, maybe they're the kid that then can like help you keep everyone there.
So we had an example on the east side of Detroit a few years ago with the youth that we were working with in one of our Jobs for America's Graduates programs. And the youth in that program were youth who had already been identified as kids with high barriers and lots of barriers to success. And so they were already being nurtured in a classroom that really mattered, that was devoted to that. But a kid came into class and somebody bumped into him, and not on purpose, but bumped into him, and he ended up throwing a table across the room. And unfortunately, at that moment, there was a substitute in the classroom instead of one of our restorative practitioners, right? And he ended up getting sent to the office, and it was a whole big drama, and he ended up being put on suspension. And then his regular restorative practices teacher came back the next day and said, why didn't you just ask him what happened? Not what's wrong with you, why are you behaving this way, but what happened to you? Because the minute he went to that kid's house who was on suspension, went to the kid's house and said, what happened to you? That just wasn't like you. Like, what happened? And then shut up and just paused, right? Well, come to find out that the kid had been robbed of his backpack on the way to school by a bunch of school bullies in a neighborhood where you always had to be vigilant. His backpack was stolen, his food was stolen, and the only money he had was stolen. And so he came, and it was like the 3rd time something horrible had happened in the past month. He came into school so wound up and so like in trauma and stress that, of course, the minute somebody bumped him, he just lashed out, right? It was just that arousal thing. If the right adult had been in the space, they would never have put him on suspension. They would have taken him aside, maybe even given him a hug after he, calmed down a little and said, what happened? Because the minute you open up that space, a youth, if you've in relationship with them, they'll tell you what happened, right? They'll open up. But if you confront them in a more punitive fashion, they're just going to stay in that fight, flight, crazy frenzy, right, Jess?
Yeah, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn can be one too, although that tends to be a post-traumatic response more so than in the traumatic moment. But yeah, and when we also know that these are things that we're going to be seeing, really sitting down with fellow mentors too and being like, if we have a kid that comes and they're drunk today. What do we do? Like if we have a kid, and just having also a universal response to how, like, because your mentors are going to be able to come up with some great ideas on how to keep kids there if they get that right. Because once we get them, we just gotta hold on them. So any way that we can be right. The behavior being bad, but the kid themselves is not bad, and that they are valued and included, and they belong when they're here, even if they have some of those secondary things going on in trauma. And we know it can be difficult, especially for the hyperarousal stuff, which can sometimes mean throwing things or yelling or things that feel really unsafe, and really trying to figure out, is this a kid that's going to be unsafe with me? Do I have a different sort of responsibility here? Or can we work with this? Are they having an experience that's coming from really they've been harmed? And how can we welcome them back in, hear about that harm, help them get back from survive mode to thrive mode, and be able to be with us and be attentive and be there.
We need to move to the next slide because I know we have a little bit more content to cover. Okay. So building on what Jess has just shared in that previous slide, here you can see additional examples of actions you can take today to ensure that you're being proactively responsive to the trauma and toxic stress that so many of our youth, and by the way, adults, are experiencing in our world, right? So in any one of these seem really, really, really simple, but they help us move in this very different direction, right? Treat mentors as peers and partners, right? Don't treat them as people who don't have knowledge or expertise, right? Ask them what they think and how they'd like to move forward. If you see signs of secondary trauma in your mentors, for instance, they're just getting overwhelmed and stressed by what they're hearing and the stories they're hearing, address it directly. Don't dismiss it. Don't tell them that they'll get used to it or toughen up. Naming the fact that they're feeling that secondary stress and trauma is an important step towards healing. And also, more importantly, retaining your mentors, right? If they know that it's a safe space for them to vent to you about what they're hearing, then they can stay in the work with you, right? Obviously, mentors want to know that their work is meaningful and appreciated. Sometimes we have a tendency to be ticked off because somebody didn't show up. And so the next time they come, we're a little bit sourpuss at them, or we're just, we're kind of punitive without saying so. You can't ever thank people enough. Everybody's got a life, and even our mentors are people who may come from traumatized backgrounds and something might have happened to them, right? Or just being caring and loving, right, is really, really important. So all of these are pretty simple, but the more we move towards utilizing these kinds of practices, the more likely we are to support the healing journeys of the individuals we're serving. And Jess and I would like to think that that's really what we care about most, right? If people feel safe and can begin healing, they'll be far more likely to learn and grow with your support, right? They'll be able to move forward. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide.
And Tracy, we also have a question. Can you give some examples of giving youth specific objectives as opposed to tasks?
Sure. So instead of saying to someone, you need to get 10 questions, you need to answer 10 questions on your math, your math worksheet before you can go outside, you might say to a youth, well, how many questions do you think you should get done before, we could take a break and go do something fun, right? You're involved, and sometimes you'll be surprised. They might set a limit that's a lot higher than, it might be 25 questions instead of 10, right? There's an example where you're giving an objective, like we need to get some math homework done before we can go outside, but you're helping have them figure out what the task is or how they're going to accomplish it. Jess, can you think of an example?
Really anything that you can offer a small choice. And one of the reasons why we do this is that when we actually look at the neurology of the brain in trauma, we tend to be very our trauma brain tends not to use any of our decision-making parts of our brain. So anytime we can encourage emotional recognition, regulation, breathing and calming down, making a choice or a decision, even a simple one, Do you want to have a peanut butter sandwich? Do you want to have a turkey sandwich? I know that seems ridiculous, but anytime that we can move somebody out of trauma brain into Thrive brain, we've nailed it. We've done a good job. So that can be really anything that you can do. Do you want to read or do math?
The brain, right?
It's rewiring the brain.
Rewiring the brain for health and resilience.
Yeah,
as simple as
absolutely.
it sounds. So we know we're right up against 6 more minutes to the hour, and we want to have you guys share a takeaway. What's one thing you could do in the next week for yourself or your mentees or your mentors if you're running a mentor program to reduce the impacts of toxic stress and trauma? And we'll watch those in the chat. And also, we will be more than happy to take questions, but we've also got resource pages to share. So don't go away yet.
And please do share, because your idea could spark an idea in somebody else. So like, no idea is too small. And once again, just put those in the chat. We'll be keeping an eye on it. Making certain to take more time for reflection. Oh, yes, I really love that one.
I mean, we
Demonstrating
do things like we teach
self-care.
youth. I'm sure a lot of you do this, but like taking time to teach really simple, basic breathing techniques. Start with check-ins and check-outs. Those are restorative practices. Every day we start with a check-in or a check-out, and it could be, what's one way to describe the weather in your head today? And somebody might be like, oh, I'm all sunshine. Somebody else might be like stormy, right? And by getting those sorts of answers, you get to check in and kind of get a sense of where everybody is and how they're feeling. And it gives you a sense of how you need to interact with them. Unplugging from technology. Oh my God, technology is so bad for us, right? It also stops our brains from being able to shut down easily at night. So if you can encourage youth to unplug half an hour before they go to bed and read a book, that's good for them, right? Go for a walk. Yes.
In nature, yes.
It's amazingly healing, right? We know this. That's why having plants inside is a really good thing. Simple as it sounds, bring plants inside so kids get that exposure to plants.
Recent research actually had somebody that was injured, and some people spent time taking a walk in the forest, and some people just stayed inside or walked inside, and the individuals that went in the forest healed faster every single time. They just came out with a research study. I think it might have been at U of M actually, Trace. There's something about the light and being outside. It literally heals you more, which I know sounds, it sounds almost magical, but they've done studies, and it really, really shows how important it is to get outside. David,
and that oxygen is good too, right? That fresh oxygen that plants give off.
Yes. Practice new grounding or mindfulness exercises. Yes. Right. Anytime we're getting our brain out of okay, what has to happen? What is the task? We can do that for ourselves. It helps us too, because often, right, we can respond to it. We're empathetic people. We respond to each other's trauma, right? We mirror that in each other. So if we're all feeling stress, even taking a minute out to take that breath, and maybe if you haven't done so today.
Yeah, breathing.
Wow.
Getting that oxygen all the way to the very bottom of your lungs and then taking it all the way out. Do that as an exercise with your classroom. If you've got a group of mentees, like teaching them those breathing techniques again is healing, right? Because we tend to stay in that upper respiratory area, but all the way in and all the way out. Simple stuff. Do it every day with the kids that you're working with. Oh, these are such great answers.
These are wonderful.
Well, knowing that we have to stay with time, let's move forward, because I know we have a few more slides we've got to whip through. So this slide and the next one, and I know these are all going to be sent out to you, so you don't have to write rapidly. But this page, and you can go ahead to the next one, are our 2 sets of books and resources that have guided us and helped us come to this amalgamation of perspectives that we have and that we utilize. We do training in the workforce systems. We've worked with returning citizens. We've worked with nonprofit folks, Jobs for America's graduates and their outreach. So we tend to focus on marginalized communities, but we also talk to folks that look like us, so that they can learn more about how to work with folks that might not look like them. And so we're open to all of that and want you to be able to take advantage of the resources that have inspired us over the years. You can go ahead to the next slide. Dave, I think this is you, if you want to mention what we've done with you guys, or do you want us to?
Sure. Well, how about we all do it? Yeah, these, just as Tracy was mentioning, with the resources, this is Hcre training for mentors and volunteers training. So we're incredibly happy just to have Tracy and Jess put this together for us in Michigan. And we're going to be rolling this out soon for mentors and volunteers as well. And we're really excited to have that. And then, yeah, go ahead, Tracy. Sorry.
I was going to say what we did was we created a learning management system series of digestible chunks of knowledge, the kind of information we shared with you today in more detail, but like in digestible chunks. So 10, 15, 20-minute learning modules where we've filmed ourselves giving a presentation on something, and then people can do questions and answers afterwards, so they can basically stack their knowledge, right, as they have time to take 15 minutes to watch a module. So we know that that's really important in our busy lives. And so partnering with Michigan Community Service Commission to create that learning management system was really exciting for us. Zoom has made an entirely new world for all of us in being able to share knowledge and resources. And so if you want to learn more about that, Dave Martis is your expert in the state level. We're really pleased to have partnered with them on that work.
Digestible chunks. I love that. See, you were going to leave that up to me. There's no way I would have said, but I think that's fantastic.
Digestible chunks when
yeah.
the come to mind.
Yes. These are, this is how you can reach us. If you have more questions, you want to learn more, have more questions that we weren't able to cover here. We do training with nonprofit organizations. When folks get in touch with us and we talk to them about what that involves, we're happy to talk to them. And I think they said the recordings of this will be sent out to you within a week, but let's go to the next slide. Okay, these are mentor resources, right? So Desiree or Delia or somebody?
Yeah, these. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
These are Delia. Do you want to?
Sure.
Yeah. Everybody, this is Delia. I was going to say thank you to Delia as well. Thank you and the rest of the mentor crew. Because I know if you've been on before, everybody, Minnie is generally on, but Minnie has left mentor on to other things. But we're so happy. I mean, mentor is just a wonderful partner for us, being the affiliate in Michigan. Fantastic. So this has been, from my perspective, a seamless transition with Delia, with Desiree, and with Khadijah. So yeah, go ahead, Delia.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, you've heard from one of our affiliates today, Dave Martis at Mentor Michigan, but we have a whole network of affiliates across the nation. So if you don't know if you have an affiliate, we encourage you to go to that link and check. We're working on expanding across all 50 states, but we certainly can serve you no matter what state you live in. And one way to get services across the country is through the National Mentoring Resource Center, which you'll see that bottom link, which is funded through OJJDP. And you can get no cost training and technical assistance on any of the things that you heard about today and more through that website. So we hope you'll Google it, National Mentoring Resource Center.org, and access some free support from our affiliates there. We also have a mentoring connector. So if you're looking for a mentoring program to get involved with, either as a mentor or as a mentee or as a parent or a caregiver, it's just a fantastic kind of local lookup tool where you can put your zip code in and just easily search for mentoring programs in your region. So just wanted to share some of those resources before we wrap up.
And if you would, after the webinar, just please help us out by answering the survey questions at the end. Everyone, just a reminder, everyone will get an email with information on how to download the slides, recording, and resources on the CMWS webpage on the Mentor website. There's the link for that. And just stay connected. Email us at collaborative webinar series at mentoring.org. Tweet with the hashtag mentoring webinar. Visit our webpage on the Mentor website for past and upcoming webinars. And if you would, if there's any questions that you have, kindly type those into the Q&A panel. I know we have a few more minutes here, but once again, I just wanted to say thank you to Tracy and to Jess as well. And as I mentioned before, just the mentor team, Delia, Desiree, and Khadijah have been fantastic. So thank you very much for joining this. And yeah, if you do have a few questions you want Tracy and Jess to answer, kindly type those in the Q&A panel. Thank you. And join us next month. Next month, the webinar will be incorporating a strengths-based mindset into mentor training and program policies. That will be June 16th from 1 to 2:30.
That sounds like a great training. Oh my gosh.
There was a question somebody had, how do we get more resources on this topic specific to mentoring? I think Desiree, I see, is typing something in the chat.
So that's a really good question. A lot of this work hasn't been developed specifically for mentoring and volunteering other than what Tracy and I developed. And we just found that we created a lot of that on the basis of our model. So, but we're here and we would love to share all of the resources we have with you. So if you just send an email out to me or Tracy, we would be happy to share everything that we have with you, you know, or if you let us know a little bit more about specifically like what types, if you're interested in practices or theory or research, we've got that too, and we'd be happy to share. So please reach out.
Yeah, I think the questions have slowed, and everybody has our contact information. Please reach out if you do have any questions. Maybe something pops into your head a little bit later, but you will have contact information for Jess and Tracy. So thank you everyone for joining. There's a question there. It's not a question, it just says thank you. And I'm hopeful.
Keep doing that great work. We
I'm
count
yeah,
on you guys
yeah.
out there to do
I'm
that.
hopeful you're looking at the chat too, because there's just a lot of positive comments and that just a ton of appreciation for you two.
Wow.
We love doing this work.
A sincere pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for everything that you do, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or we have resources that we can share.